The rusted padlock snapped easily in Jake Morrison's hands, but the workshop door creaked open like it hadn't been touched in decades. Inside the cramped space behind his grandfather's house, dust particles danced in shafts of afternoon light, revealing workbenches cluttered with strange mechanical parts and half-finished inventions. For 20 years, neighbors had whispered about the haunted workshop, the mysterious humming sounds, the flashing lights at midnight, the way electronics went haywire nearby. Jake had always dismissed it as small-town nonsense. What he found changed everything. Hidden beneath a false floor lay a prototype energy device that defied every law of physics he'd learned in engineering school before he dropped out to work the factory line. The machine was still running, powered by something that shouldn't exist. But as Jake examined the impossible technology, he realized his grandfather hadn't died of natural causes. Someone had silenced him to bury this discovery. Now that same someone knew Jake had found it. The footsteps outside weren't his imagination. But how do you hide a secret that could save the world or destroy it? Jake's calloused fingers trembled as he traced the device's smooth surface. The metal felt warm, almost alive, and pulsed with an energy that made his teeth ache. Blue light coursed through transparent tubes that snaked around a central core no bigger than a basketball. According to the handwritten notes scattered beside it, notes in his grandfather's meticulous handwriting, this contraption had been running continuously for 3 years. 3 years without any visible power source. The footsteps circled the building now, deliberate and measured. Jake's heart hammered against his ribs as he quickly photographed the device with his phone. The screen flickered and died the moment he got within 2 feet of the machine. Of course. Just like the neighbors had always complained about. "Damn it, Grandpa," he whispered. "What did you get yourself into?" Life had other plans. His father's gambling debts, his mother's cancer treatments, and his own academic struggles had landed him on the factory floor at Morrison Electronics, ironically named, though no relation to his family. For 8 years, he'd assembled circuit boards and told himself he was fine with ordinary. The footsteps stopped directly outside the door. Jake frantically searched for another exit. The workshop had only one door, but there was a small window near the back wall. He could probably squeeze through if he moved the equipment aside. As quietly as possible, he began shifting a complex apparatus that looked like a cross between a telescope and a particle accelerator. A sheet of paper fell from beneath the machine. Jake snatched it up, recognizing his grandfather's writing immediately. Meridian Corp. Jake knew that name. They'd tried to buy out Morrison Electronics last year, offering twice what the company was worth. When the owners refused, mysterious accidents started plaguing the factory. Equipment failures, worker injuries, quality control issues that nearly bankrupted them. Eventually, Meridian got their buyout. The door handle rattled. Jake stuffed the note into his pocket and grabbed the nearest tools, a crowbar and what looked like a modified Geiger counter. The window latch fought him, corroded with age and neglect. Behind him, the energy device hummed louder, as if responding to his elevated stress levels. "Mr. Morrison?" a voice called from outside. Professional, polite, deadly. "We know you're in there. We'd like to discuss your grandfather's work." The latch finally gave way. Jake pushed the window open and squeezed through, dropping into the overgrown garden behind the workshop. He could see 2 men in dark suits at the front door now, and a third circling around back. Corporate types with military postures and the kind of practiced patience that suggested they were very good at their job. Jake ran. He crashed through Mrs. Henderson's hedge, ignoring her startled shouts from her kitchen window, and sprinted toward the tree line that separated the residential area from the old quarry. His work boots pounded against the uneven ground as branches whipped at his face. Behind him, he heard the workshop door splinter. Whatever his grandfather had discovered, people were willing to kill for it. And now Jake was next. The rusty key turned with surprising ease, as if the lock had been waiting for this moment. Jake pushed open the workshop door, and the musty smell of old wood and machine oil hit him immediately. Dust particles danced in the afternoon sunlight that streamed through grimy windows, illuminating a space that looked frozen in time. His grandfather's workshop was larger than he'd expected, stretching back into shadows that seemed to swallow the weak light. Workbenches lined the walls, cluttered with tools he couldn't identify and projects in various states of completion. A massive lathe dominated one corner, its metal surface dulled by years of neglect. Jake stepped inside, floorboards creaking beneath his feet. Everything felt heavy with memory and abandonment. His grandfather had been a brilliant inventor, according to family stories, but Jake had only vague recollections of the man who died when he was 12. What he remembered most was his grandfather's hands, always moving, always tinkering, stained with grease and possibility. He'd inherited the property 6 months ago, along with a letter from his grandfather's attorney explaining that the workshop contained items of significant value and importance. Jake had assumed it meant old tools, or maybe some vintage machinery worth selling. He needed the money desperately since losing his engineering job at the aerospace company. A sound made him freeze. It was faint but distinct, a low humming, almost musical, coming from somewhere deeper in the workshop. The hair on his arms stood up. The neighbors had mentioned strange noises, claiming the place was haunted. Jake had dismissed their concerns as small-town superstition, but now, standing alone in the dusty silence, he wasn't so sure. The humming stopped. Jake waited, barely breathing, but heard nothing except his own heartbeat. He pulled out his phone's flashlight and ventured deeper into the workshop, following a narrow path between towers of equipment and half-finished contraptions. The beam revealed intricate mechanical drawings pinned to the walls, covered in his grandfather's precise handwriting and mathematical equations that hurt to look at. In the far corner, hidden behind a canvas tarp, Jake discovered something that made him catch his breath. The tarp covered what looked like a sophisticated computer setup, multiple monitors, processing units, and devices he couldn't begin to identify. Everything appeared modern, sleek, and completely out of place in the vintage workshop. There was no dust on any of it. Jake's engineering background kicked in as he examined the equipment more closely. The technology looked advanced, maybe even experimental. Some components bore no manufacturer's marks or model numbers he recognized. Others seemed to be custom-built, crafted with the same meticulous attention to detail he'd seen in his grandfather's other work. A small green light blinked steadily on one of the processors. The system was powered on. That was impossible. According to the utility company, electricity to the workshop had been shut off 3 years ago when his grandfather died. Yet here was equipment running as if someone had been using it yesterday. Jake traced cables along the floor, following them to what should have been a standard electrical panel. Instead, he found something that looked like a fusion of traditional wiring and technology that belonged in a science fiction movie. Crystalline components pulsed with soft blue light, and energy seemed to flow through conduits that resembled veins more than copper wire. The humming started again. This time, Jake pinpointed its source, a device about the size of a briefcase sitting on the main workbench. Its surface was smooth and dark, interrupted only by a series of symbols that seemed to shift when he wasn't looking directly at them. The humming grew stronger as he approached, developing harmonic overtones that resonated in his bones. Without thinking, Jake reached toward the device. The moment his fingers made contact, the world exploded into sensation. Images flooded his mind. Blueprints, equations, glimpses of technology that shouldn't exist. He saw his grandfather, decades younger, working frantically on these same machines. He felt the weight of discovery, the terror of understanding something too big, too dangerous. Jake jerked his hand away, gasping. The workshop fell silent again, but the afterimages burned behind his eyes. His grandfather hadn't just been an inventor. He'd been working on something revolutionary, something that could change everything. A car door slammed outside. Jake's blood turned cold. Through the grimy window, he could see a black sedan parked on the street. 2 figures in dark suits were walking toward the workshop, with the purposeful stride of people who had every right to be there. They knew. Somehow they knew he'd found it. Jake looked around frantically for another way out. The workshop had seemed like a treasure trove moments ago, Now it felt like a trap. The humming device sat silent on the workbench, keeping its secrets, while footsteps crunched on gravel outside. The door handle rattled. Someone was trying to get in, and Jake had a sinking feeling they wouldn't be asking politely. The flashlight beam trembled in Jake's hand as he descended the hidden staircase, each wooden step groaning under his weight. The air grew colder with every step, carrying a metallic taste that made his mouth dry. Behind him, the false wall had automatically sealed itself with a soft pneumatic hiss, leaving him committed to whatever lay below. The staircase ended at a reinforced steel door, its surface unmarked except for a small scanner embedded in the frame. Jake approached cautiously, noting the red lead that pulsed like a heartbeat. As he drew closer, the scanner emitted a soft blue light that swept across his face. A moment later, the heavy door clicked open with the sound of multiple locks disengaging. Biometric recognition, Jake whispered to himself. But how could it know? The thought died as he stepped into the underground chamber and his flashlight revealed the impossible. The room stretched far beyond what the workshop's footprint should have allowed, its walls lined with banks of humming equipment that cast an eerie blue glow. Holographic displays floated in mid-air, showing incomprehensible data streams and three-dimensional models that rotated slowly in space. The ghostly sounds he'd heard upstairs were nothing compared to the symphony of electronic whispers that filled this hidden laboratory. Jake moved deeper into the chamber, his footsteps muffled by the strange material covering the floor. Every surface seemed to pulse with subdued energy, and the air itself felt charged with electricity. At the room's center stood a massive cylindrical device, its surface covered in what looked like liquid mercury that flowed in impossible patterns. Neural mapping prototype 7, he read from a nearby display. Consciousness transfer probability, 87%. The words sent ice through his veins. Consciousness transfer. His grandfather had been working on downloading human minds into machines. Jake stumbled backward, his flashlight sweeping across workstations covered with brain scan imagery and complex mathematical equations that hurt to look at. A soft chime drew his attention to a wall-mounted screen that had activated at his approach. His grandfather's face appeared, looking exactly as Jake remembered him, but the timestamp showed this recording was made only 3 months ago, 2 years after his supposed death. "Hello, Jake," the recording said, and Jake's blood turned to ice. "If you're seeing this, then either I'm truly dead this time or I've been forced to disappear permanently. I'm sorry for the deception, but the work was too important to abandon, too dangerous to reveal." Jake sank into a nearby chair, his legs suddenly unable to support him. "Grandpa? But you! The funeral!" "The technology you see around you represents 30 years of research into the fundamental nature of consciousness itself," the recording continued. "I discovered how to map neural patterns completely, how to preserve the essence of a person's mind beyond the death of their body. But I also learned that some discoveries are too powerful for humanity to handle responsibly." The display shifted to show newspaper clippings and government documents. Jake recognized names from tech companies and defense contractors, all marked with red X's. 3 of my former research partners have died under suspicious circumstances. Another disappeared entirely. They tried to steal the work, sell it to the highest bidder. Military applications, corporate espionage, digital immortality for those rich enough to afford it. They saw dollar signs where I saw the end of human nature as we know it. Jake's hands shook as he reached toward the screen, desperate to touch his grandfather's face. "Why didn't you trust me? Why didn't you tell me you were alive?" As if responding to his question, the recording's tone softened. "I wanted to protect you, Jake. But now the choice is yours. The technology is stable, the consciousness transfer process is nearly perfected. In the wrong hands, it could create a world where death becomes obsolete for the wealthy while the poor remain mortal, where governments could interrogate the uploaded minds of their enemies for eternity, where the very concept of human identity becomes meaningless." The screen flickered, showing a complex self-destruct sequence. "You can destroy everything with the red switch beside the main console, or You can continue my work, but if you choose that path, you'll need to stay hidden. They're still watching, still waiting. Dr. Elizabeth Chen at the university is the only person I trusted with fragments of the research. Find her, but be careful who else you trust. The recording paused, his grandfather's eyes seeming to look directly at him. There's something else, Jake. The reason the biometric scanner accepted you, the reason you can access all of this, you're not just my grandson. You're my genetic clone, created from my DNA when I first realized how dangerous this work had become. You have my memories locked away in your subconscious, my knowledge waiting to be unlocked. You are my contingency plan, my way of ensuring this technology serves humanity rather than destroying it. The screen went black, leaving Jake alone in the humming chamber with the weight of impossible revelation crushing down on him. Clone. The word echoed in his mind as he stared at his own hands, wondering whose memories lay buried in his brain, whose destiny he'd inherited along with this terrible secret. Above him, the workshop's floorboards creaked with the slow, deliberate footsteps of someone who had no right to be there. The morning sun cast long shadows across the workshop floor as Jake returned with a steaming cup of coffee and renewed determination. He'd barely slept, his mind churning over the impossible sight of that suspended wrench. Every rational explanation crumbled under the weight of what he'd witnessed. He approached the workbench where he'd left the device, noting how ordinary it looked in daylight. Just weathered metal and glass, innocent as a broken radio. But Jake knew better now. His grandfather had been working on something extraordinary, something that defied physics as he understood it. The leather journal lay open beside the device, its pages filled with his grandfather's meticulous handwriting. Jake settled onto the stool and began reading more carefully, struggling through the technical terminology and complex diagrams. Day 847, the resonance frequency achieved stable levitation for 3 minutes today. The harmonic oscillations in the crystal matrix seemed to create a localized gravitational anomaly. Martha thinks I'm losing my mind, spending so much time out here. If only she knew how close I am to changing everything. Jake's heart clenched at the mention of his grandmother. She died when he was 12, 5 years before his grandfather's own passing. He remembered how heartbroken the old man had been, how he'd thrown himself into his work afterward. Day 901, the military applications are obvious, but that's not what this is for. Imagine construction workers who could lift steel beams with the touch of a button, medical equipment that could position itself with perfect precision, transport systems that could move cargo without friction or fuel. The world doesn't need another weapon, it needs a miracle. A sound made Jake look up from the journal. A car was pulling into his driveway, gravel crunching under its tires. Through the workshop's dusty window, he could see a sleek black sedan, definitely not from around here. His nearest neighbors were farmers who drove pickup trucks older than he was. Jake quickly closed the journal and threw a paint-stained tarp over the device. His heart hammered as footsteps approached the workshop door. He forced himself to appear casual, picking up a rusty screwdriver and pretending to examine it. The knock was firm, authoritative. "Mr. Morrison, I'd like a word with you." Jake opened the door to find a woman in her 40s wearing an expensive charcoal suit that looked completely out of place in the rural setting. Her dark hair was pulled back severely, and her eyes were the color of winter sky, beautiful but cold. "I'm Dr. Sarah Chen," she said, extending a business card. "I worked with your grandfather many years ago. I was sorry to hear about your loss." Jake glanced at the card. Dr. Sarah Chen, Director of Advanced Research, Meridian Technologies. He'd never heard his grandfather mention anyone by that name, but then again, the old man had been secretive about his work. "Thank you," Jake said carefully, "though I have to say he never mentioned you." Her smile was practiced, professional. "We collaborated briefly in the early stages of a project. I was hoping to recover some research materials he borrowed. Nothing valuable to most people, just technical documents that belonged to my company." Something in her tone set Jake on edge. She was lying. He was sure of it. Her eyes kept darting past him, trying to see into the workshop. "I'm afraid I haven't found anything like that," Jake said. "Just old tools and spare parts, mostly. Nothing that would interest a technology company." "I see." Dr. Chen's expression didn't change, but Jake noticed her hand move slightly toward her jacket. "Would you mind if I took a look around? I'd recognize our proprietary materials immediately." "Actually, I would mind." Jake stepped closer to the doorframe, blocking her view. "The workshop is pretty dangerous right now. Unstable shelving, exposed wiring. I'd hate for you to get hurt." The temperature between them seemed to drop several degrees. Dr. Chen's professional mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something harder underneath. "Mr. Morrison, I think you should know that the materials I'm looking for could be considered classified technology. Keeping them would be problematic for someone in your position." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Jake felt adrenaline surge through his system. "Are you threatening me, Dr. Chen?" Her smile returned, cold as winter moonlight. "Of course not. I'm simply trying to help you avoid any legal complications. Perhaps I could come back tomorrow when you've had more time to search." "Perhaps," Jake said, though he had no intention of letting this woman anywhere near his grandfather's device. Dr. Chen nodded and turned to leave, then paused. "Your grandfather was a brilliant man, Mr. Morrison, but sometimes brilliant people make dangerous choices. I hope you're wiser than he was." Jake watched her drive away, memorizing the license plate number. Only when her car disappeared around the bend did he allow himself to breathe normally again. He turned back to the workshop, his grandfather's journal clutched in his hand. Whatever the old man had discovered, it was valuable enough to bring corporate sharks circling. The question was, what was Jake going to do about it? The drive back to town felt longer than usual, Jake's mind racing faster than his truck's aging engine. The USB drive sat heavy in his pocket, its contents potentially worth more than everything he'd ever owned combined. But Dr. Chen's warnings echoed in his head with each mile that passed. He'd planned to go straight home, maybe grab some dinner and dive deeper into the files. Instead, he found himself pulling into the parking lot of Murphy's Diner, needing time to think before facing the isolation of his apartment. The familiar neon sign buzzed overhead, casting pink shadows across the cracked asphalt. Inside, the dinner crowd was thinning out. Jake slid into a corner booth where he could watch the entrance and ordered coffee he didn't really want. The waitress, a woman named Betty, who'd been working there since he was in high school, brought him a steaming mug and a slice of apple pie he hadn't asked for. "You look like you could use it, honey," she said with a maternal smile that reminded him painfully of his grandfather. Jake was halfway through the pie when he noticed the man at the counter. Tall, lean, wearing a dark jacket despite the warm evening. Nothing immediately suspicious, except for the way he kept glancing toward Jake's booth in the reflection of the chrome napkin dispenser. When their eyes met in the mirror, the man quickly looked away. Paranoia, Jake told himself. Dr. Chen's cryptic warnings were making him jumpy. But when he paid his check and stepped outside, the man from the counter was nowhere to be seen. The parking lot felt too quiet, too empty for a Tuesday evening. Jake's truck started on the second try, the engine's familiar rumble somewhat reassuring. He pulled onto Main Street, checking his mirrors more often than necessary. 3 blocks from the diner, he was certain the black sedan 2 cars back had been following him since he left the restaurant. Instead of heading home, Jake took a right toward the industrial district. If someone was tailing him, he wanted to know for sure before leading them to his apartment. The sedan made the same turn, then another. By the time Jake had taken 4 seemingly random turns through the maze of warehouses and loading docks, there was no doubt. His hands tightened on the steering wheel as he considered his options. He could try to lose them, but his ancient pickup was no match for a newer car on straightaways. He could drive to the police station, but what would he tell them? That he was being followed because of technology he'd stolen from his dead grandfather's workshop? The sedan was gaining ground now, no longer bothering with subtlety. In his rear-view mirror, Jake could see two figures in the front seats. The passenger window rolled down, and something metallic caught the streetlight. Jake floored the accelerator just as the first shot rang out. His rear window exploded in a shower of safety glass, and he yanked the wheel hard left, tires screaming as he careened around a corner. The USB drive bounced out of his pocket, skittering across the passenger seat. His phone buzzed with an incoming call. Without looking, he grabbed it and answered. "Jake Morrison?" The voice was calm, professional, with just a hint of an accent he couldn't place. "Who is this?" "Someone who can help you live through the next 10 minutes. Take the next right onto Industrial Boulevard." Jake glanced in his remaining mirror. The sedan was still there, closing fast. "How do I know you're not with them?" "Because if I were, you'd already be dead. Right turn now." Against every instinct screaming in his head, Jake made the turn. Industrial Boulevard was wider, better lit, with more traffic even at this hour. "Good. Now listen carefully. In half a mile, you'll see an all-night auto parts store on your left. Pull into their lot and park near the service bay. Keep your engine running." "This is insane. I'm calling the police." "The police can't protect you from what's coming, Mr. Morrison, but I can. Half a mile, service bay. Don't disappoint me." The line went dead. Jake's hands were shaking now, sweat beading on his forehead despite the air conditioning. The sedan had fallen back slightly, confused by his sudden turn onto a main road where gunfire would draw unwanted attention. The auto parts store appeared ahead, its bright fluorescent lights cutting through the darkness like a beacon. Jake's grandfather had always taught him to trust his gut, but right now his gut was telling him two different things: run, and that the mysterious caller might be his only chance at survival. The USB drive gleamed on the passenger seat, innocent looking for something that had apparently painted a target on his back. Whatever secrets his grandfather had buried in that workshop, someone was willing to kill for them. Jake made his choice and turned into the parking lot. The USB drive felt like a live wire in Jake's pocket as he walked through the university's physics building the next morning. After a sleepless night studying the files, he'd made a decision that both terrified and exhilarated him. He needed someone with expertise he didn't possess, someone who could help him understand the true implications of his grandfather's work. Dr. Elena Vasquez's office occupied a corner of the third floor, its windows overlooking the campus quad, where students hurried between classes. Jake had taken her quantum mechanics course 2 years ago, and she'd always struck him as brilliant but approachable, the kind of professor who encouraged wild questions and unconventional thinking. He knocked on her door, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Come in," came her voice, crisp with a slight Spanish accent. Elena looked up from her computer, recognition dawning in her dark eyes. "Jake Morrison, isn't it? You're not in any of my classes this semester." "No, ma'am. Actually, I was hoping to discuss something with you, something unusual." He closed the door behind him and took the chair she gestured toward. "It's about quantum field manipulation and dimensional barriers." Her eyebrows shot up. "That's quite a leap from your mechanical engineering major. What's brought this on? Your grandfather was a researcher?" "Not officially. He was a machinist, but—" Jake paused, choosing his words carefully. "Dr. Vasquez, what would you say if I told you someone had found a way to thin the barriers between parallel dimensions?" Elena leaned back in her chair, studying him intently. "I'd say that person had been reading too much science fiction. The energy requirements alone would be astronomical, and the mathematics—" She trailed off, something shifting in her expression. "Why are you asking me this, Jake?" Instead of answering, he plugged the USB drive into her computer. "Would you mind taking a look at something?" The first file opened to reveal pages of equations that made Jake's head spin. But Elena's reaction was immediate and dramatic. She leaned forward, her fingers flying over the keyboard as she scrolled through the calculations. "Where did you get this?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "My grandfather's workshop. There's more." Jake opened the audio files, and the familiar harmonic frequencies filled the small office. Elena's face went pale as she listened. her eyes darting between the sound waves displayed on screen and the equations. "This is impossible," she breathed. "These calculations, they're solving problems that shouldn't have solutions. And this frequency pattern, it's creating a resonance that could theoretically destabilize quantum fields on a localized level. Is that dangerous?" "Dangerous?" Elena laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Jake, if this is real, it's the most significant scientific breakthrough in human history. But the applications—" She stopped scrolling, pointing at a particular equation. "Look at this. Your grandfather wasn't just thinking about observation or communication between parallel dimensions. These calculations are for selective matter displacement." Jake's blood turned cold. "Meaning what, exactly?" "Meaning he was working on a way to move objects, or people, between dimensional states. Make them exist in multiple realities simultaneously, or shift them to parallel versions of our world entirely." Elena's hands were shaking slightly as she continued reading. "The military applications alone would be staggering. Soldiers who could phase through walls, weapons that could bypass any defense, surveillance that could penetrate any barrier." A soft knock on the office door made them both freeze. Without thinking, Jake minimized the files and ejected the USB drive. "Dr. Vasquez," a man's voice called from the hallway. "This is security. We need to speak with you about a computer access irregularity." "Just a moment," Elena called out, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. She quickly deleted the browser history and whispered urgently to Jake. "They couldn't have traced this that fast unless they were already monitoring for specific keywords or file signatures." The knocking came again, more insistent this time. Jake pocketed the USB drive and moved toward the window. "What does that mean?" "It means someone's been watching for any attempt to access information about dimensional manipulation research." Elena's fingers flew over her keyboard, clearing any traces of their activity. "And if they're monitoring the university's network, they probably know exactly who you are now." Jake's stomach dropped as he realized the full implications. He'd led them straight to Elena, and now they were both in danger. The window lock turned with a soft click, and cool morning air rushed into the office. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I didn't know." "Go," Elena hissed. "Find somewhere safe and don't trust anyone in authority. If this technology is real, there are people who will kill to control it." The rain hammered against the workshop's tin roof as Jake crouched beside his grandfather's workbench, the device's blue glow casting eerie shadows across his face. Emma stood guard by the window, peering through the grimy glass at the empty yard beyond. 3 days had passed since the break-in, and paranoia had become their constant companion. "There," Jake whispered, pointing to a series of equations scratched into the metal surface of the device. "These aren't just random calculations, they're coordinates." Emma turned from her vigil. "Coordinates to what?" Before Jake could answer, a soft chime echoed through the workshop. Both of them froze. The sound hadn't come from the device. It was something else entirely. Jake's eyes swept the cluttered space until he spotted a small red light blinking on what appeared to be an old radio mounted high on the workshop's back wall. "That wasn't there before," Emma said, following his gaze. Jake dragged a stepladder over and climbed up to examine the device. It looked like a 1960 seconds ham radio, but when he touched it, the surface felt wrong, too smooth, too warm. A hidden panel slid open at his touch, revealing a digital display that definitely didn't belong to any vintage electronics. "Incoming transmission," he read aloud from the display. "Audio only." Emma climbed up beside him on the ladder. "From who?" The radio crackled to life before he could respond. A voice emerged from the static, elderly, refined, with a slight accent Jake couldn't place. "If you're hearing this, then you've activated the primary device. My deepest condolences on Harold's passing. He was a remarkable man." Jake's blood ran cold. His grandfather's name. This message was meant for him. The voice continued. "My name is Dr. Victor Reese. I worked with your grandfather on Project Resonance 40 years ago. What you've discovered in that workshop represents technology that certain people would kill to possess, or to destroy. Emma grabbed Jake's arm. This is insane. Your grandfather was involved in some kind of secret project? The transmission wasn't finished. The device you found is one of 3 prototypes. The others were thought destroyed, but recent intelligence suggests at least one survived. The coordinates Harold carved into the housing will lead you to our old research facility. You'll find answers there, and hopefully the means to protect yourself. The transmission ended with a sharp burst of static, then silence. Jake stared at the now dark radio, his mind reeling. 40 years ago, that would have been the early 80s, Cold War era, Emma said quietly. Secret government projects, black budgets. Your grandfather was what, in his 20s then? Fresh out of MIT. Jake climbed down from the ladder, his legs shaky. He never talked about his early career, always said he went straight into private consulting after college. Emma followed him down, because he couldn't talk about it. Classified projects, security clearances, that whole world operates in shadows. Jake pulled out his phone and entered the coordinates from the device. The GPS located them immediately, a remote area in the mountains, about 3 hours' drive north. The satellite view showed what looked like an abandoned industrial complex surrounded by dense forest. We have to go there, he said. Absolutely not. Emma's voice was firm. Jake, think about this rationally. Someone broke into your house. Someone else is apparently monitoring this workshop well enough to know when you activated that device. This Dr. Reese could be anyone, including the person who wants you dead. Or he could be the only person who can help us understand what we're dealing with. Jake gestured toward the humming device. Look at this thing, Emma. It's generating energy from nothing, manipulating matter at the quantum level. This isn't just some old prototype, it's technology that could change everything. Energy production, manufacturing, space travel. We can't just ignore it. Thunder crashed overhead, and both of them instinctively looked toward the door. In the brief silence that followed, Jake heard something that made his stomach drop, the soft crunch of gravel under tires. Emma was already moving toward the window. Car in the driveway, she whispered. No headlights. Jake quickly shut down the device, plunging them into darkness. They crouched behind the workbench as footsteps approached the workshop door. Whoever was out there moved with purpose, no attempt at stealth. The doorknob turned slowly. Jake's hand found the crowbar he'd been using to pry open his grandfather's old storage crates. Emma clutched a heavy wrench. Neither of them breathed as the workshop door creaked open and a silhouette appeared against the storm-darkened sky. The storage unit felt like stepping into a tomb. Jake's flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing stacks of identical wooden crates arranged in perfect rows. The musty air carried hints of machine oil and something else. Ozone, like the aftermath of a lightning strike. Jesus, Marcus whispered beside him. How much stuff did your grandfather have? Jake counted at least 30 crates, each marked with cryptic alphanumeric codes. He approached the nearest one, running his fingers along the smooth wood. Unlike the rough construction in the workshop, these containers were precisely crafted, sealed with what looked like military-grade latches. Hand me that crowbar, Jake said, nodding toward the tool Marcus had grabbed from the workshop. The first crate opened with a sharp crack. Inside, nestled in custom foam padding, lay components that defied easy classification. Crystalline structures pulsed with faint inner light, connected to metallic frameworks that seemed to shift and flow when Jake wasn't looking directly at them. This doesn't look like anything from the 1950s, Marcus said, lifting one of the crystal formations. The moment his skin made contact, it flared brighter, casting dancing shadows across the storage unit walls. Jake's phone buzzed. Sarah's name appeared on the screen. We need to talk, her text read. Found something about your grandfather's government contracts. Meet me at the diner on 5th Street. Come alone. Everything okay? Marcus asked, still mesmerized by the glowing crystal. Sarah wants to meet. She found something about Grandpa's work. Jake hesitated. She said, come alone. Marcus set the crystal back in its foam nest, the light dimming to a barely perceptible glow. You trust her? The question hung in the air like smoke. 3 days ago, Jake would have answered without hesitation. Now, after the break-in, the mysterious phone calls, and the revelation that his grandfather had been involved in technology decades ahead of its time, he wasn't sure who to trust. "I think so," Jake said finally. "But I want you to stay here. Document everything in these crates. Take photos, notes, whatever. If something happens to me—" "Nothing's going to happen to you," Marcus interrupted. "But yeah, I'll catalog this stuff. Some of these components, they're incredible. Look at this." He lifted a device that resembled a miniature satellite dish made of what appeared to be living metal. The surface is actually reorganizing itself. It's like it's responding to the environment. Jake checked his watch. Sarah had asked him to meet in 30 minutes. The diner was only 10 minutes away, but he wanted time to think, to prepare for whatever she might tell him. "Lock up behind me," he told Marcus. "Don't let anyone in, no matter who they claim to be." The drive to the diner took him through the older part of town, where his grandfather had spent most of his life. Jake found himself looking at familiar buildings with new eyes, wondering how many secrets lay hidden behind weathered brick facades and boarded-up windows. Sarah was already waiting in a corner booth when he arrived, her laptop open and surrounded by scattered papers. She looked up as he approached, her expression grave. "Sit down," she said without preamble. "What I'm about to show you changes everything." Jake slid into the booth opposite her. The diner was nearly empty except for a tired-looking waitress and a man in a baseball cap reading a newspaper at the counter. "I dug deeper into your grandfather's military records," Sarah began, turning her laptop screen toward him. "The official files were mostly redacted, but I have contacts who specialize in declassified documents." The screen displayed a scanned military document dated 1952. Most of the text was blacked out, but Jake could make out fragments: Project Prometheus, temporal displacement, and his grandfather's name. "Temporal displacement?" Jake read aloud. "That's just the beginning." Sarah pulled out a manila folder thick with papers. "Your grandfather wasn't working on conventional weapons or even advanced electronics. He was part of a classified program researching time manipulation." Jake's blood chilled. The machine in the workshop, its impossible precision, the way it seemed to anticipate his actions. Suddenly it all made a terrible kind of sense. "The project was shut down in 1953, Sarah continued, officially because it was deemed too dangerous. Unofficially because they achieved something that scared the government enough to bury it completely. The sounds in the workshop," Jake said slowly. "The machine that appears and disappears." "You're telling me my grandfather built a time machine?" "Not exactly." Sarah leaned forward, lowering her voice even though they were effectively alone. "Based on these documents, I think he built something that exists partially outside our normal time stream. That's why you can't always see it, why it seems to phase in and out of reality." "Sarah," Jake said urgently, "someone else knows about this technology. They've been watching me, trying to get into the workshop." Her face paled. "Then we're already out of time." The fluorescent lights in Dr. Chen's laboratory cast everything in harsh, clinical white as Jake spread the workshop blueprints across her metal desk. Sarah stood beside him, her fingers drumming nervously against her thigh while Chen examined the documents through wire-rimmed glasses. "Extraordinary," Chen murmured, tracing the intricate circuit diagrams with her finger. "Your grandfather was decades ahead of his time. This quantum resonance chamber design. I've seen theoretical papers suggesting something similar, but nothing this detailed." Jake pointed to a series of symbols scattered throughout the margins. "We think these markings might be some kind of code. My grandfather was paranoid about his work being stolen." Chen's expression darkened. With good reason, apparently. She looked up at them both. "You said someone broke into the workshop?" "Twice," Sarah confirmed. "The second time, they took several components. We barely escaped." The physicist leaned back in her chair, her face grave. "What you're describing, this technology could fundamentally alter our understanding of quantum mechanics. In the wrong hands, it could be weaponized in ways we can't imagine. A chill ran down Jake's spine. Weaponized how? Quantum manipulation at this level could theoretically disrupt electronic systems on a massive scale. Think of it as an electromagnetic pulse, but infinitely more precise and powerful. It could cripple entire power grids, disable military systems, crash global communications networks. Sarah grabbed Jake's arm. That's why they want it. Not for scientific advancement, for destruction. Chen stood and moved to a locked cabinet, retrieving a small device that looked like a modified tablet. I've been working on quantum detection equipment for the university. If your grandfather's machine is still operational, this should pick up its signature from several miles away. She powered on the device, and immediately it began emitting a low, pulsing tone. The screen displayed a three-dimensional map with a bright red dot pulsing steadily. It's active, Chen breathed. The quantum field your grandfather created is still running. Jake stared at the dot representing his grandfather's workshop. How is that possible? We haven't turned anything on. Quantum systems at this level might be self-sustaining once initiated. Your grandfather may have created a perpetual quantum state. Chen's voice carried a mixture of awe and terror. This changes everything. The laboratory door burst open, and Jake's heart stopped. 3 figures in dark clothing entered, their faces hidden behind tactical masks. The leader carried what looked like a military-grade scanner, its screen glowing with the same quantum signature they'd been discussing. Dr. Chen, the leader spoke with a cultured accent Jake couldn't place. We appreciate your assistance in locating the Hartwell technology. Chen stepped protectively in front of Jake and Sarah. This is private property. You have no right. Rights are irrelevant. The figure raised a sleek weapon. The technology cannot be allowed to reach certain parties. We represent interests that require its immediate acquisition. Jake's mind raced. These weren't common thieves or even corporate spies. The military precision of their equipment and movements suggested something far more dangerous. Government operatives or international agents. Sarah slowly reached into her jacket. Jake gave me something before we came here, she said carefully. A backup drive with all the workshop data. The leader's weapon shifted toward her. Remove it slowly. Instead, Sarah pressed a button on what Jake now realized was a small transmitter. Immediately, alarms began blaring throughout the building, and emergency lights bathed everything in pulsing red. Fire alarm, she shouted over the noise. Buildings going into lockdown. The masked figures moved quickly toward them, but Chen had already activated a hidden panel behind her desk. A section of the wall slid open, revealing a narrow passage. Emergency exit, she called out. Physics building has connections to the old steam tunnels. They plunged into the passage as shouts erupted behind them. The tunnel was cramped and poorly lit, forcing them to move single file through the darkness. Jake could hear their pursuers entering the passage, their flashlight beams cutting through the shadows. How did they know we were here? Jake gasped as they ran. They must be monitoring quantum detection equipment, Chen replied. Any attempt to analyze your grandfather's technology would create traceable signatures. The tunnel branched ahead, and Chen led them left toward what she claimed was an exit near the campus parking garage. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew closer. There's something else, Chen said, as they climbed a rusted ladder toward street level. The quantum signature I detected, it's not stable. Your grandfather's machine is building toward some kind of cascade event. What does that mean? Sarah asked. Chen's voice was grim as she pushed open a heavy metal grate above them. It means we may not be the only ones in danger. If that quantum field reaches critical mass and collapses, it could take half the city with it. They emerged into the night air, but Jake knew their problems were just beginning. Somewhere behind them, deadly agents were closing in, and ahead lay a workshop containing technology that might destroy everything he'd ever known. Jake's hands trembled as he powered up the quantum resonance chamber for the 3rd time that morning. Each activation brought the same result. The holographic display flickered to life, showing energy patterns that defied every law of physics he'd ever learned. The ghostly sounds that had first drawn him to his grandfather's workshop now made perfect sense. They weren't supernatural at all, but the audible manifestation of quantum fields manipulating space-time itself. Dr. Sarah Chen leaned over his shoulder, her breath catching as the readings stabilized. "The energy output is increasing exponentially with each test," she whispered. "Jake, do you understand what this means? Your grandfather didn't just discover clean energy, he found a way to tap into the zero-point field." "Unlimited power," Jake murmured, watching the swirling patterns dance across the projection. "Enough to solve the energy crisis, reverse climate change, transform everything." He paused, a chill running down his spine. "And someone killed him for it." Sarah nodded grimly. "Or killed him to prevent it from seeing daylight. There are trillions of dollars at stake here. Oil companies, nuclear industries, entire governments whose power structures depend on energy scarcity." A sharp crack echoed through the workshop. Both of them froze. Jake quickly shut down the machine, plunging the room into relative darkness. Through the grimy windows, he could see a black sedan parked across the street, the same one that had been following him for the past 2 days. Sarah grabbed his arm. "We need to document everything and get it to someone we can trust. A journalist, maybe, or—" "The basement," Jake whispered urgently. "Grandpa showed me a hidden room down there when I was 12. I thought it was just for playing hide-and-seek." They crept toward the narrow staircase, Jake clutching the portable drive containing his grandfather's research files. Behind them, he heard the soft scrape of the workshop door opening. Whoever was coming didn't care about stealth anymore. The basement was a maze of old furniture and forgotten projects. Jake led Sarah past dusty workbenches and towers of cardboard boxes, his memory guiding him toward the far corner where a seemingly solid wall concealed a hidden panel. His fingers found the concealed switch exactly where his grandfather had shown him 15 years ago. The wall segment swung inward, revealing a cramped space lined with metal shelving. Emergency supplies, communication equipment, and stacks of research journals filled every available inch. His grandfather had been preparing for this day. Edward Hartwell was more than just an inventor, Sarah realized, scanning the hidden cache. He was building a resistance network. Jake picked up one of the journals, recognizing his grandfather's precise handwriting. The entries detailed years of careful planning, backup sites, trusted contacts, contingency protocols. The old man had known his discovery would make him a target, and he'd prepared accordingly. Footsteps echoed overhead, moving systematically through the workshop. Jake counted at least 3 different sets of boots. These weren't random thieves or curious neighbors. Sarah pointed to an old radio setup in the corner. "He has communication links to researchers in 12 different countries. Jake, your grandfather wasn't working alone." A new voice drifted down from above, crisp, authoritative, definitely military. "Tear it apart. Every circuit board, every component. The technology exists, and it's somewhere in this building." Jake's blood ran cold as he recognized the speaker, Colonel Marcus Reed, the same man who'd attended his grandfather's funeral with suspicious interest, the same man who'd been asking subtle questions about Edward Hartwell's final projects. "Government?" Sarah mouthed silently. Jake shook his head. During his grandfather's funeral, he'd overheard Reed talking on his phone about private contracts and corporate clients. This wasn't official government business. This was something far more dangerous. The footsteps moved toward the basement stairs. "Package compromised," she whispered into the microphone, initiating Protocol 7. A crackling response came back immediately. "Safe House Delta, 1 hour." The basement door rattled as someone tested the handle above them. Jake prayed his grandfather's modifications to the lock would hold long enough for them to escape. According to the basement's blueprints, an old storm drain connected to the municipal system ran directly beneath the hidden room's floor. Sarah was already prying up the concealed access panel, revealing a narrow tunnel that disappeared into darkness. The sound of splintering wood echoed from above as their pursuers began forcing the basement door. Jake took one last look at his grandfather's hidden sanctuary, understanding now why the old man had seemed so tired. so burdened in his final years. Edward Hartwell hadn't just been an eccentric inventor. He'd been a guardian of technology too powerful for the world's current power structures to allow. The basement door crashed open just as Jake disappeared into the tunnel behind Sarah, carrying humanity's future in a small metal drive. The abandoned textile mill loomed against the night sky like a concrete tomb. Jake's hands trembled as he gripped the steering wheel, watching shadows dance across broken windows 3 stories up. Sarah sat beside him, her laptop balanced on her knees, the screen's glow illuminating her determined expression. "The signal's definitely coming from inside," she whispered, adjusting the frequency analyzer they'd rigged together. "Same electromagnetic signature as your grandfather's device." Jake killed the engine, plunging them into darkness. The mill had been shuttered for decades, another casualty of the town's industrial decline. But if Marcus Steele was here, it wasn't for nostalgic reasons. "We should wait for the police," Sarah said, though her voice lacked conviction. "And tell them what? That a billionaire industrialist is hiding stolen interdimensional technology in an abandoned building?" Jake shook his head. "They'd lock us up." Through the windshield he spotted movement near the mill's loading dock. A black SUV sat parked in the shadows, barely visible. They weren't alone. "Don't answer it," Sarah hissed, but he was already swiping. "Mr. Morrison." Marcus Steele's voice was calm, almost pleasant. "I see you've found us. Rather impressive detective work." Jake's blood turned to ice. He scanned the darkness around them, realizing they'd walked into a trap. "What do you want, Steele?" "The same thing you want. To understand your grandfather's work, to see it reach its full potential." A pause. "Come inside, both of you. And Mr. Morrison, don't make this more complicated than it needs to be." The line went dead. Sarah was already packing up her equipment, her movements sharp with fear and anger. "We're leaving," she said. "Right now." But as Jake reached for the ignition, headlights blazed to life behind them. The black SUV had moved, blocking their exit. 2 more vehicles materialized from hidden positions, boxing them in completely. "Too late for that," Jake muttered. They walked toward the mill in silence, their footsteps echoing off crumbling concrete. The loading dock door stood open, spilling yellow light into the night. Jake's mind raced through possibilities, escape routes, anything that might give them an advantage. But Steele held all the cards. Inside, the mill had been transformed. Banks of computers lined makeshift tables, cables snaking across the floor like mechanical vines. And there, in the center of it all, sat a device that made Jake's heart stop. It was his grandfather's machine, but evolved. Larger, more complex, with additional components that hummed with barely contained energy. The air around it shimmered like heat waves, and Jake could feel the hair on his arms standing up. "Magnificent, isn't it?" Steele emerged from behind a computer bank, flanked by 2 men in dark suits. He looked exactly like his corporate photos, silver-haired, expensively dressed, radiating quiet authority. "Your grandfather was a genius, but he lacked vision. He saw the possibilities and ran from them, because he knew what people like you would do with them." Jake shot back. Steele smiled. "People like me? You mean people who understand that revolutionary technology belongs in capable hands?" He gestured toward the device. "Do you have any idea what this represents? Unlimited clean energy, instantaneous transportation, communication across impossible distances. Your grandfather could have changed the world. Instead, he chose to hide it," one of the suited men added. Jake recognized the voice, the same man who'd been asking questions around town. Sarah stepped closer to the machine, her scientific curiosity overriding her fear. "The resonance frequency," she breathed. "You've amplified it exponentially, but the quantum field destabilization is well within acceptable parameters," Steele interrupted. "We've been testing it for months, ever since we convinced your grandfather's former assistant to share his research." Jake's stomach dropped. "Dr. Chen? But he died years ago." "No, Mr. Morrison. He disappeared. There's a difference. Steele's smile turned predatory. Amazing what people will do when properly motivated. The machine's humming intensified, and the air itself seemed to thicken. Jake grabbed Sarah's arm, pulling her back as sparks of electricity began dancing across the device's surface. "You're insane," Sarah said. "This level of quantum manipulation in an uncontrolled environment. You could tear a hole in space-time itself, or open a door to unlimited possibilities." Steele nodded to his men. "I'm afraid this is where our conversation ends. You've seen too much, learned too much, but don't worry. Your deaths will serve a greater purpose." The suited men moved forward, but Jake was already in motion. He lunged toward the nearest computer bank, Sarah right behind him. His grandfather's journal had mentioned fail-safes, emergency protocols built into the original design. If those protocols still existed in this bastardized version, they might have one chance. Behind them, Steele's voice rose above the machine's growing roar. "Stop them!" But Jake's fingers were already flying across the keyboard, inputting the shutdown sequence his grandfather had made him memorize all those summers ago. The machine's humming reached a crescendo, then suddenly shifted pitch. Something was happening. The warehouse reeked of oil and rust, its broken windows casting jagged shadows across the concrete floor. Jake crouched behind a stack of shipping containers, his heart hammering against his ribs as he watched Elena pace near the center of the space. She held her phone like a weapon, barking orders at whoever was on the other end. "I don't care what it takes," she snarled. "Find them. The old man's notes, the prototype, everything. We've come too far to let some college kid ruin decades of work." Sarah pressed closer to Jake's shoulder, her breath warm against his ear. "We need to get out of here," she whispered. "Call the police." Jake shook his head, pointing to his dead phone. The EMP burst from his grandfather's device had fried every piece of electronics within a 3-block radius. They were on their own, trapped in a game where they barely understood the rules. Elena ended her call and turned toward their hiding spot. For a terrifying moment, Jake thought she'd spotted them, but her gaze swept past without stopping. She walked to a metal briefcase sitting on a nearby table and popped it open. Inside, nestled in foam padding, lay a device that made Jake's blood freeze. It looked exactly like the prototype from his grandfather's workshop, but sleeker, more refined. The crystalline core pulsed with the same ethereal energy, but this version had additional components, modulators, and amplifiers that Jake recognized from his grandfather's most dangerous theoretical sketches. "My God," Sarah breathed, barely audible. "They've been developing it too." Elena lifted the device with reverent care, her fingers dancing across its surface. 20 years, she murmured to herself. 20 years since that stubborn old fool refused to see reason. The warehouse door crashed open, and Marcus strode in, followed by 2 men Jake didn't recognize. Both wore tactical gear and moved with military precision. Marcus's face was a mask of controlled fury, his earlier facade of helpful neighbor completely abandoned. "The workshop is clean," he reported, "but they took something with them. The resonance chamber is gone, and there are signs of recent activation." Elena's grip tightened on her device. "They have it working?" "More than working. Whatever they did created a localized electromagnetic pulse. Every electronic device in a 4-block radius is dead." Marcus pulled out a tablet, its screen cracked but functional. "But we tracked their phones to this general area before the pulse hit." Jake felt Sarah tense beside him. They'd been so focused on escaping that they hadn't considered how easily they could be tracked. His mind raced through their options. The warehouse had 3 exits he could see, but all were covered by Elena's men. The loading dock to their left might offer an escape route, but reaching it would require crossing 30 feet of open ground. Elena activated her device, and the same haunting harmonic filled the air that Jake remembered from the workshop. But this version was different, darker somehow, with an underlying frequency that made his teeth ache. The metal surfaces around the warehouse began to vibrate in sympathy. "The quantum resonance field is stable," she said. checking readings on a handheld scanner. If Jake's grandfather really perfected the amplification matrix, we need that prototype. This changes everything. What exactly are we dealing with here? One of the tactical men asked. Jake's blood went cold as he understood the implications. His grandfather hadn't just invented a new energy source. He'd stumbled onto something that could reshape the fundamental nature of reality. No wonder Elena and her people were willing to kill for it. Sarah grabbed his arm, pointing toward the loading dock. A service tunnel ran along the wall, partially hidden by machinery. If they could reach it without being spotted, they might be able to circle around and escape through the rear of the building. They were about to move when Marcus's radio crackled to life. Perimeter team reporting movement in Sector 7. 2 figures heading toward the old subway entrance. Elena's head snapped up. That's them. Move. The tactical teams scattered, heading for the exits. Jake realized with growing horror that Elena had anticipated their escape route. The subway tunnels would have seemed like the perfect way to disappear into the city's underground maze, but it was exactly what she expected them to do. "We're the decoy," Sarah whispered, understanding dawning in her eyes. Jake nodded grimly. Somehow, Elena had outmaneuvered them again. But as he watched her carefully pack away her device, a desperate plan began to form in his mind. They might be trapped, but Elena had just revealed something crucial. She needed his grandfather's prototype to complete her work, which meant Jake held the one card she couldn't afford to lose. The abandoned textile mill loomed against the storm clouds like a monument to industrial decay. Jake pressed himself against the rusted loading dock, rain streaming down his face as he watched Marcus Chen's men position themselves around the building's perimeter. 6 figures in dark clothing, each carrying what looked like military-grade equipment. "This is insane," Sarah whispered beside him, her voice barely audible above the thunder. "We should have gone to the FBI." With what proof? Jake adjusted his grip on the modified scanner he'd built from his grandfather's notes. The device hummed softly, its readings confirming what he'd suspected. The quantum resonance signatures were stronger here than anywhere else. Chen's people have infiltrated law enforcement. We saw what happened to Detective Morrison. The memory of Morrison's accident still haunted him. The detective had been asking too many questions about the workshop, and 3 days later his car went off a bridge. No witnesses, no skid marks, just another unfortunate victim of wet roads. Elena emerged from the shadows behind them, her face grim. "I've confirmed it. This mill was one of the original test sites for Project Echo. My grandfather's research team used it in 1952 before everything went underground. And Chen thinks there's still equipment here?" "Not just equipment," Elena said, pulling out a waterlogged folder. "According to these documents I found in the university archives, they were conducting full-scale experiments, trying to create stable quantum tunnels for instantaneous communication across continents. The military applications alone would be worth billions." A brilliant flash of lightning illuminated the mill's broken windows, and Jake caught a glimpse of movement inside. "They're already in there." Sarah grabbed his arm. "Jake, we need to think about this. Even if we get proof of what Chen's doing, we're still just 3 people against a private military contractor with unlimited resources." "Not unlimited," Jake said, remembering something Dr. Reeves had mentioned during their brief phone conversation before his line went dead. "Chen's been burning through investors. That's why he needs the technology now. He's desperate." Another crack of thunder masked the sound of their footsteps as they approached a side entrance. Jake's scanner was going wild now, its readings spiking with each step toward the building. Whatever was inside, it was active. The door hung open, its hinges long since rusted away. Jake led them into a vast space filled with the skeletal remains of industrial looms, but it was what lay beneath the machinery that made his breath catch. A series of metallic platforms arranged in geometric patterns, their surfaces covered in the same quantum crystalline structures he'd found in his grandfather's workshop. "My God," Elena breathed, "it's a transmission array." They were trying to send objects, not just signals. The sound hit them then. That same ethereal humming Jake had first heard in the workshop, but amplified 100-fold. The very air seemed to vibrate with potential energy, and Jake's scanner began emitting warning beeps. "Someone's activated it," he whispered. Voices echoed from deeper in the mill, and Jake recognized Marcus Chen's calm, measured tones. "The resonance frequency is stabilizing. Begin the sequence." They crept closer, using the rusted machinery as cover. Through gaps in the equipment, Jake could see Chen standing before a control panel that looked far too modern for the decrepit surroundings. 3 technicians worked frantically at computer terminals, their screens casting an eerie blue glow across their faces. "Sir, we're detecting interference," one technician reported. "There's another quantum signature in the area." Chen's head snapped up. "Where?" Jake looked down at his scanner in horror. The device was broadcasting its own signal, marking their location like a beacon. He fumbled for the power switch, but it was too late. "Building perimeter, Section 7, the technician announced. Chen smiled coldly. "Bring them to me, alive. We have questions to ask." "Run!" Jake hissed, but Sarah was already moving. They bolted toward the rear of the building as shouts erupted behind them. Footsteps pounded on metal walkways, and Jake heard the distinctive whine of some kind of energy weapon charging up. "The containment field is destabilizing," one technician screamed. "Hold the sequence," Chen barked back. "We're too close to abort now." Jake realized with mounting horror what was happening. Chen wasn't just trying to replicate the technology. He was attempting to open a permanent quantum tunnel, but without proper safeguards. Without understanding the delicate balance his grandfather had spent decades perfecting, the consequences would be catastrophic. The air itself began to shimmer and warp around the transmission array. Reality seemed to bend inward, creating a visible distortion that hurt to look at directly. And somewhere in the distance, Jake could swear he heard something responding, an answering call from across dimensions that made his blood run cold. Chen had no idea what he was about to unleash. "They're persistent," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the distant hum of the city. Jake's phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Chen, "Safe house compromised." They got to Martinez. Trust no one. His blood ran cold. Agent Martinez had been their only reliable contact in the government, the one person who seemed genuinely interested in protecting the technology rather than weaponizing it. If Nexus Industries had reached him, nowhere was safe. "We need to move," Jake said, pulling Sarah deeper into the shadows between 2 abandoned buildings. "Chen says they got to Martinez." Sarah's face went pale in the dim streetlight. "Then we're completely on our own." They made their way through the maze of empty warehouses, staying low and avoiding the main streets. Jake's mind raced through their dwindling options. The quantum resonance technology was too dangerous to leave in corporate hands, but they couldn't run forever. Eventually, Nexus would corner them. And when they did, a distant sound made them both freeze, the rhythmic thrum of helicopter rotors cutting through the night air. Jake grabbed Sarah's hand and pulled her toward a rusted fire escape hanging precariously from the side of a defunct textile factory. "Up," he hissed. On the factory's roof, they had a clear view of the operation unfolding below. Black vehicles had surrounded the entire district. Men in tactical gear moved with military precision, sealing off every exit route. This wasn't just corporate security. This was a full-scale military operation. "How did they mobilize so quickly?" Sarah asked, crouching behind a ventilation unit. Jake pulled out his grandfather's journal, flipping to the pages he'd been studying earlier. "Because this isn't just about the technology," he said, pointing to a passage written in his grandfather's careful handwriting. "Look at this. Project Prometheus was never truly abandoned. Too many powerful people invested too much to let it die." Sarah read over his shoulder, her expression growing more troubled with each line. "Your grandfather knew this day would come. He was preparing for it." The journal contained detailed contingency plans, backup locations, and most importantly, a list of people his grandfather had trusted, scientists, journalists, and politicians who could ensure the technology would be used for humanity's benefit rather than control. A new sound joined the helicopter rotors, the distinctive whine of drone engines. Jake looked up to see small aircraft with blinking lights spreading out across the sky like a mechanical constellation. "Thermal imaging," Sarah said grimly. "They'll find us in minutes." "There's a way out," he said, pointing to a storm drain at the building's base. "But we'll have to time it perfectly." They waited until the nearest spotlight swept past their building, then rappelled down the fire escape as quickly as they dared. The drain cover was exactly where the journal indicated, hidden behind a dumpster that had probably been sitting there since his grandfather's time. The tunnel was pitch black and reeked of stagnant water, but it led in the right direction, away from the dragnet closing around them. They splashed through ankle-deep water for what felt like hours, guided only by Jake's phone's flashlight and his grandfather's detailed maps. When they finally emerged through a forgotten subway grate, dawn was breaking over the city. They found themselves in Central Park, among the early morning joggers and dog walkers who had no idea that a technological revolution was being hunted through the streets around them. Jake's phone rang. "Unknown number. Don't answer it," Sarah warned. But something made him pick up. The voice on the other end was cultured, confident, and completely unfamiliar. "Mr. Morrison, my name is Victoria Cross, CEO of Nexus Industries. I believe we need to have a conversation. I have nothing to say to you. On the contrary, I think you'll find our discussion quite illuminating. You see, your grandfather wasn't the only one working on quantum resonance technology. We've had our own research program for 20 years, and we're very close to a breakthrough. The question is whether you'd like to be part of the solution or continue being part of the problem." Jake met Sarah's eyes. She shook her head frantically. "What kind of solution?" he asked. Cross's laugh was like ice cracking. "The permanent kind, Mr. Morrison, the permanent kind." Jake's hands trembled as he powered down the quantum resonance chamber, the familiar hum fading to silence. The workshop felt eerily quiet without the constant background thrum of his grandfather's machines. Sarah stood beside him, her laptop bag slung over her shoulder, ready for their escape to the university lab where they planned to make the technology public. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, watching him carefully wrap the smaller prototype devices in foam padding. "Once we release this information, there's no going back." Before Jake could answer, the workshop's main door exploded inward. Marcus Holloway stepped through the splintered frame, no longer bothering with pretense or corporate pleasantries. Behind him came 3 armed men in tactical gear, their weapons trained on Jake and Sarah. "Step away from the equipment," Marcus commanded, his voice cold and professional. "Both of you." Jake positioned himself protectively in front of Sarah, his mind racing. They were trapped. The workshop's back exit was blocked by another figure he recognized with a chill. Detective Chen emerged from the shadows, her service weapon drawn but pointed at the floor. "Detective?" Sarah's voice cracked with disbelief. "You're with them?" Chen's expression remained neutral, but Jake caught a flicker of something, regret, determination, in her eyes. "It's complicated," she said simply. Marcus smiled, the expression predatory. "Detective Chen has been very helpful in monitoring your activities. Did you really think your grandfather's work could remain hidden forever? We've been watching this place for 15 years, waiting for someone to finally crack his encryption." "You killed him," Jake accused, fury building in his chest. "My grandfather trusted you." "Your grandfather was a stubborn idealist," Marcus replied, moving closer to the quantum chamber. He refused to see the bigger picture. This technology in the wrong hands could destabilize entire economies, topple governments. It needs to be controlled, managed responsibly. "By Holloway Industries, you mean?" Sarah said bitterly. "By people who understand the consequences of unlimited clean energy," Marcus corrected. "Your grandfather wanted to give it away freely, like some kind of technological messiah. He never considered what would happen to oil companies, to entire nations whose economies depend on energy scarcity. The chaos would be unimaginable." Jake edged backward, his fingers finding the emergency shutdown sequence his grandfather had taught him years ago. a failsafe that would overload the quantum field generators and destroy all the equipment rather than let it fall into the wrong hands. His grandfather had made him memorize it, insisting it was their last line of defense. "The world deserves to choose," Jake said, his hand moving slowly toward the control panel. "You don't get to make that decision for everyone." Marcus noticed the movement and gestured sharply. One of his men stepped forward, rifle raised. "Don't be foolish, Jake. Your grandfather already tried that same failsafe. Why do you think the accident happened 15 years ago? He triggered the overload sequence rather than let us take his work. It nearly killed him." The revelation hit Jake like a physical blow. The accident that had left his grandfather partially disabled, that had forced him into seclusion. It hadn't been an accident at all. It had been an act of defiance. "But he was smarter than we gave him credit for," Marcus continued. "He built redundancies, backup systems, encrypted protocols that required his specific biometric signatures to access. We've been waiting all these years for you to unlock them for us. The workshop only responds to family DNA," Jake realized with growing horror. "You needed me to activate everything. Very good. Now, step away from the controls before I have my men shoot your girlfriend." Detective Chen suddenly spoke up, her voice cutting through the tension. "That's enough, Marcus." She raised her weapon, but instead of pointing it at Jake and Sarah, she aimed it at Marcus Holloway. "I said that's enough." Marcus turned, his face registering surprise and anger. "Detective, what are you doing?" "My job," Chen replied firmly. "I've been undercover for 18 months, investigating corporate espionage and the suspicious death of Thomas Morrison. You just confessed to 15 years of illegal surveillance and attempted murder." The tactical team hesitated, uncertain whether to follow Marcus's orders or defer to law enforcement. In that moment of confusion, Jake slammed his hand down on the emergency sequence, but instead of triggering the overload, he activated his grandfather's final protocol, one he'd discovered only hours earlier in the deepest layers of the system. "No!" Marcus lunged toward the controls, but Chen intercepted him, tackling him to the ground as alarms began blaring throughout the workshop. Jake pulled Sarah close, as the quantum resonance chamber hummed with purposeful energy. His grandfather's voice echoed in his memory. "Sometimes the only way to protect something is to set it free." The secret was out. There was no stopping it now. The abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town felt like stepping into a tomb. Jake's footsteps echoed through the cavernous space as he followed the coordinates Dr. Reeves had given him, Sarah close behind with the prototype device clutched in her arms. The quantum resonator hummed softly, its ethereal glow casting dancing shadows on the rusted walls. "This better not be another trap," Sarah whispered, her voice tight with exhaustion. They'd been running for 36 hours straight, ever since the lab explosion that had nearly killed them both. A door slammed somewhere in the darkness, followed by the sound of multiple footsteps. Too many footsteps. Jake's blood turned to ice as armed figures emerged from behind shipping containers, their weapons trained on him and Sarah. "Well, well," came a familiar voice from the shadows. Marcus Volkov stepped into the light, his expensive suit incongruous in the industrial setting. Behind him walked Dr. Reeves, his face a mask of resignation and regret. "You've led us quite a chase, Mr. Harrison." "You son of a bitch," Jake snarled, his hand instinctively moving toward the emergency shutdown device in his pocket. "Dr. Reeves, how could you—" "I'm sorry, Jake," the older scientist said, his voice barely above a whisper. "They have my daughter. They've had her for weeks." Volkov smiled, the expression cold and predatory. "Dr. Reeves has been most helpful in tracking your movements. Did you really think you could hide from us indefinitely? We have resources you can't imagine." Sarah stepped protectively in front of the quantum resonator, though Jake could see her hands trembling. "What do you want?" "What I've always wanted," Volkov replied, gesturing to his men. Two of them moved forward, weapons ready, complete control over this technology. "Your grandfather was a brilliant man, Jake, but he lacked vision. He saw the peaceful applications, clean energy, faster than light communication, revolutionary medical treatments. But he was blind to the real potential. "You mean the weapons applications," Jake said flatly. "I mean power," Volkov corrected. "The ability to reshape reality itself. Do you have any idea what governments would pay for technology that can manipulate quantum fields? What armies could accomplish with weapons that exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously?" The warehouse suddenly filled with an otherworldly hum as the quantum resonator's activity intensified. The device in Sarah's arms began pulsing faster, its light growing brighter. Jake realized with growing alarm that it was responding to something, another quantum field nearby. "The prototype is detecting interference," Dr. Reeves said urgently, his scientific instincts overriding his fear. "There's another quantum device active in this location." Volkov's confident expression flickered. "That's impossible. We swept this entire building." The humming grew louder, and Jake felt the familiar sensation of reality becoming fluid around them. But this was different from his grandfather's workshop. More chaotic, less controlled. Metal beams began vibrating sympathetically, and dust motes in the air started moving in impossible patterns. "Jake," Sarah said, her voice tight with panic. "I can't control it. The resonator is syncing with whatever's causing this interference." "Grandfather," he breathed, disbelief warring with hope. The figure raised something in his hands, another quantum device, larger and more complex than the prototype. When he activated it, the interference pattern shifted dramatically, and suddenly Jake could see what his grandfather had been planning. The old man wasn't dead. He'd been hiding, using quantum phase technology to exist slightly out of sync with normal reality, invisible, intangible, but very much alive. And now he was evening the odds. "Hello, Marcus," came his grandfather's voice, strong and clear despite the quantum distortion. "Still trying to steal other people's work, I see." Volkov's face twisted with rage and something else, fear. "You should have stayed dead, old man. We'll just have to make it permanent this time." But as his men raised their weapons, the quantum fields reached critical resonance. The air itself seemed to ripple, and Jake watched in fascination as some of Volkov's soldiers began flickering in and out of visibility, caught between dimensional phases. His grandfather's voice cut through the chaos. "Jake, the shutdown sequence, now while the fields are destabilized." Jake's hand closed around the emergency device, but he hesitated. Shutting down the quantum fields now might trap his grandfather forever between dimensions, but leaving them active would give Volkov exactly what he wanted, a demonstration of the technology's destructive potential. The choice would determine not just their survival, but the fate of the most powerful discovery in human history. The concrete bunker felt like a tomb as Jake pressed his back against the cold wall, listening to footsteps echo through the corridors above. Dr. Chen worked frantically at the quantum computer's interface, her fingers dancing across holographic displays that cast eerie blue light across her face. "How much longer?" Jake whispered, clutching the hard drive containing his grandfather's complete research files. 2 minutes, maybe 3, she replied without looking up. "The encryption is incredibly sophisticated. Your grandfather really didn't want this falling into the wrong hands." The footsteps stopped directly overhead. Jake held his breath, counting heartbeats. Then came the unmistakable sound of heavy boots descending metal stairs. They found the entrance. Jake breathed. Chen's hands moved faster across the interface. "The quantum resonance field is almost stable. Once I can establish a connection to the university's servers, we can upload everything simultaneously to a dozen research institutions worldwide. They won't be able to suppress it then." A voice boomed through the bunker's speakers, making them both jump. "Dr. Chen, Mr. Morrison, this is Director Harrison of the Defense Intelligence Agency. You're surrounded. Step away from the equipment and surrender the research materials." Jake recognized the voice. The same man who had been orchestrating the cover-up for decades. The same man who had ordered his grandfather's death when the old inventor had tried to go public with the revolutionary energy technology. "Keep working," Jake told Chen, moving toward the bunker's main door. He spotted a control panel nearby and began sealing the heavy blast doors his grandfather had installed. Emergency lights bathed everything in red as the locking mechanisms engaged. "That won't hold them long," Chen warned. These doors were designed for privacy, not warfare. The quantum computer hummed louder, its crystalline core pulsing with increasing intensity. Jake could feel the energy building, the same sensation he'd experienced in the workshop when the machinery first activated. The air itself seemed to vibrate with potential. "Uploading now," Chen announced, "but the connection is unstable. The quantum field is interfering with conventional communication protocols." Outside, Jake heard the whine of industrial cutting equipment. Sparks began showering from the sealed door as Harrison's team worked to breach the bunker. They had minutes at most. Jake moved to another terminal, following the startup procedures his grandfather had documented. "What if we don't try to fight the interference? What if we use it?" Chen looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" "The quantum resonance effect. It's not just about energy generation. My grandfather's notes mentioned something about quantum entanglement communication. If we can modulate the field properly..." Understanding dawned in Chen's eyes. "We could broadcast the information directly through quantum channels, instantaneous transmission to any quantum-capable receiver worldwide." The cutting sounds grew louder. Jake could see the door glowing red-hot where the industrial laser cut through the reinforced steel. His hands flew across the control interface, calling up subroutines his grandfather had buried deep in the system's architecture. Jake pointed to a cluster of programs labeled with cryptic names. Quantum Broadcast Protocol. He planned for this scenario. Chen abandoned her conventional upload attempt and joined Jake at the primary console. Together, they initialized the protocol. The quantum computer's hum became a roar, and the temperature in the bunker dropped noticeably as the system drew massive amounts of energy from the surrounding environment. The blast door exploded inward, sending fragments of steel ricocheting off the walls. Armed agents poured through the breach, weapons raised. Director Harrison followed, his face grim with determination. "Step away from the controls," he shouted over the quantum computer's noise. "You don't understand what you're dealing with. This technology could destabilize the entire global energy economy." Jake kept his hands on the interface. "That's exactly why it needs to be public. Free energy for everyone, not locked away to protect oil companies and defense contractors." "You naive fool," Harrison snarled. "Do you think we buried this technology out of greed? The quantum resonance effect can be weaponized. In the wrong hands, it could power weapons that make nuclear bombs look like firecrackers." Chen's voice cut through the tension. "Upload complete. Quantum broadcast initiated." The bunker filled with brilliant light as the quantum field reached critical resonance. Jake felt the energy wash over him, not harmful, but overwhelming in its intensity. Through the light, he saw Harrison's face twisted with fury and desperation. "Transmission confirmed to 47 quantum research facilities," Chen reported, shouting over the noise. "Cambridge, Tokyo, CERN, MIT, they all have the complete data set now." Harrison raised his sidearm, but the quantum field's electromagnetic effects had disabled all electronic devices in the bunker. The weapon was useless. As the light faded and the quantum computer cycled down to standby mode, Jake realized they had done it. His grandfather's life work, the technology that could revolutionize human civilization, was now beyond the reach of those who would suppress it. But as Harrison's cold smile returned, Jake sensed their victory might have come at a terrible price. The quantum resonator hummed with lethal intent as Marcus raised the device, its crystalline core pulsing with accumulated energy. Jake could feel the air itself vibrating, molecules dancing on the edge of chaos. One wrong move and the workshop, along with half the hillside, would be reduced to subatomic particles. "You really think you can hold that thing steady long enough to use it?" Jake asked, slowly reaching toward the secondary control panel his grandfather had installed as a failsafe. "It's not exactly designed for handheld operation." Marcus's laugh was sharp and brittle. Your grandfather was brilliant, but he was also paranoid. He built redundancies into everything, including weapons applications he never told you about. The device whined higher, its pitch climbing toward the threshold Jake recognized from his grandfather's notes. I've had 20 years to study his work, Jake. 20 years to perfect what he was too afraid to finish. Sarah inched closer to the main console, her fingers hovering over the emergency shutdown sequence. But Jake knew what she was thinking, the same thing that terrified him. The shutdown would take 47 seconds to complete. Marcus only needed 3 to fire. The pharmaceutical companies, Jake said, stalling for time. They're not your real employers, are they? Clever boy. Marcus's eyes never left Jake, but the quantum resonator wavered slightly as he spoke. Blackstone Industries has been waiting for this technology since your grandfather first published his theoretical papers in 1987. When he disappeared from the academic world, we assumed the research was dead. Then you inherited his workshop. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. You've been watching me since the funeral. Every moment, every discovery. We needed you to unlock his secrets. You were the only one with the genetic markers required for his biometric locks. Marcus's smile was cold triumph. Your grandfather was thorough, but he never imagined we'd be patient enough to wait for the next generation. Jake's hand found the fail-safe panel, his fingers tracing the sequence his grandfather had made him memorize during those childhood visits. 3 switches in precise order, followed by a palm scan. But the moment he moved, Marcus would fire. Sarah, Jake said quietly, remember what Grandpa used to say about impossible problems? Her eyes widened almost imperceptibly. She remembered. Sometimes the only way out is through the center of the maze, not around it. I'm sorry about Dr. Chen, Jake continued, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at his chest. And Rodriguez. They didn't have to die. Casualties of progress, Marcus said dismissively. Your grandfather's technology will save millions of lives once Blackstone perfects it. A few deaths along the way are acceptable losses. Like mine, like Sarah's, like anyone's who stands in the way of... Sarah lunged for the main power coupling, not the console. Jake threw himself sideways, activating the failsafe even as Marcus fired. The quantum resonator's beam carved through the air where Jake had been standing, striking the workshop's main support beam. Reality hiccuped. The beam passed through solid steel as if it were mist, the molecular bonds simply ceasing to exist. The beam died as Sarah's sabotage killed power to the primary systems, but the damage was done. The workshop groaned, its structural integrity compromised. Emergency lighting bathed everything in hellish red as his grandfather's life work began collapsing around them. Marcus roared in fury, raising the resonator for another shot, but the device was dead without the workshop's power grid. He pulled a conventional pistol instead, training it on Jake. You've destroyed everything. No, Jake said, rising slowly from behind the quantum processor array. I've set it free. Because the failsafe hadn't just shut down the workshop's systems, it had uploaded everything to the distributed network his grandfather had established decades ago. Every university, every research institution, every curious mind that had ever corresponded with the old man. The technology would belong to everyone now, not just the highest bidder. Marcus's face went white as his earpiece crackled with frantic reports from his handlers. The data was already spreading, replicating across servers worldwide. Blackstone's monopoly had just evaporated. You don't understand what you've done, Marcus whispered. There are applications of this technology that could destroy the world, Sarah finished, climbing to her feet. Or save it. Guess we'll find out together. The sound of sirens echoed from the valley below. Real sirens this time, not ghostly echoes from quantum experiments. Jake had triggered more than just a data upload. He'd activated his grandfather's final protocol, the one that would bring the authorities and ensure Marcus couldn't simply disappear. Marcus looked at his useless weapon, at the collapsing workshop, at the future he'd tried so desperately to control slipping through his fingers like quantum foam. For a moment, Jake thought he might surrender. Instead, Marcus smiled. This isn't over. He pressed something on his belt, and teleportation technology that shouldn't have existed for another century folded space around him. He was gone, leaving only the scent of ozone and the promise of future consequences. Jake helped Sarah toward the exit as his grandfather's workshop died around them, its secrets finally free to change the world.